My name is Charlotte Reed, and at 32 years old, I thought I had finally built a life where I didn't need to lean on anyone. I work as a freelance photographer, which means every paycheck, every lens, every camera, and every client project comes directly from my own hustle. Nothing has ever been handed to me. I don't have a safety net, and in truth, I've grown to see that as my strength. While many people in my family still depend on one another, I've always prided myself on walking my own path. But my parents, Richard and Linda Reed, never seemed able to let me live without trying to siphon off some piece of my success. It wasn't enough that I made my own living. To them, my stability, my income, even my reputation were things they believed they could reach into and take whenever it suited them. Welcome to Revenge Amy channel. Help our channel reach our first 1,000 subscribers by liking and subscribing. Your support is what keeps us going and allows us to continue telling inspiring stories of justice, healing, and self-worth. Now let's get back to the story. That truth became crystal clear one night at my father's birthday party. The celebration was noisy and warm on the surface. Family gathered in the backyard, music playing from the speakers, kids running across the grass. Yet beneath the string lights and the sound of clinking glasses, there was a current of tension only I seemed to notice halfway through the evening. My father pulled me aside, away from the noise and chatter. His expression was serious and his tone even heavier. "We need $139,000 for our new business," he said, as if the number itself were already carved in stone. His words dropped like weights between us, leaving me with the sense that I had no option but to comply. I felt my chest tighten. But I didn't hesitate. My answer was sharp, clear, and immediate. No, the air between us grew stiff. His face hardened instantly, the disappointment in his eyes twisting into something harsher. My mother, standing nearby, curled her lips into a smug smile that told me she'd expected my resistance and was almost pleased to watch the conflict unfold. That look set every nerve in my body on edge. I walked away, forcing myself to rejoin the laughter of relatives who had no idea what had just been demanded of me. For a while, I tried to settle back into the rhythm of the evening, though my father's words still echoed in my ears. But an hour later, the night turned into something I will never forget. When I circled back toward the patio to grab a drink, I caught sight of my father by the koi pond near the edge of the yard. My heart stopped. In his hands, he was holding my laptop, my $4,500 MacBook, the machine loaded with my entire professional life. Current edits, client projects, unreleased campaigns that represented not only my work but also my future income. "Dad?" I started, panic lacing my voice, but before I could move closer, he glanced back at me with a smirk that chilled me to the bone. "Oh, sorry," he said almost casually, and then with deliberate ease, he let it slip from his hands. The laptop hit the surface of the water, with a dull splash before sinking beneath the ripples. The koi darted away as bubbles rose, the glowing screen swallowed by darkness until it blinked out completely behind him. My mother chimed in, her voice falsely light, almost sing-song. "It's just an accident," she cooed, though her eyes were as cold as steel. The rest of the party carried on around us. Music thumped, relatives chatted, and laughter drifted through the warm night air. Not one person noticed what had just happened. I stood frozen, my chest aching as I stared at the waterlogged machine that represented thousands of hours of my effort. My livelihood drowned in seconds. But instead of screaming or pleading, both of which would have been natural, I felt something inside me change. A switch flipped, not toward rage but toward an icy calm. In that moment, my parents believed they had struck a blow that would cripple me, leaving me with no choice but to lean on them. They thought they could break me down and walk away untouched. They were dead wrong. That night, after the last guest had left and the yard had grown silent, I sat alone in my room. I didn't cry, though every part of me ached to let the tears spill. I didn't call friends for comfort or family for advice. Instead, I powered on my backup drive, scanning through the files I'd had the foresight to save. Relief trickled in when I saw some of my projects safe and untouched, as I stared at the glowing screen of my external hard drive. I felt my plan beginning to form. Not loud, not fiery, but sharp and precise. My parents thought they could tear down everything I had built, using accidents as their shield. They thought they could sabotage my career and still expect my loyalty. They were about to learn that every so-called accident comes with a price. The calmness settled deeper into my bones as the hours passed. I began drafting notes in a journal, listing the steps I would take. secure my files, protect my finances, guard my reputation. And when the time was right, make sure my parents understood that their cruelty had consequences. The next morning, I woke with a knot in my chest. The weight of what had happened hung heavy on me. But beneath it was a stronger force: determination. My drowned laptop may have been ruined, but I was not. I had work to do, and if my parents wanted to play games with my livelihood, then I would show them just how strong I had become. Do you believe a family could really go this far? That parents could sabotage their own child, smile while doing it, and expect to face no fallout? At that moment, I wasn't looking for sympathy. I wanted clarity. And I wanted to know, if you were in my place, staring at the wreckage of your life's work sinking into the water, what would you do? The morning after the party, I woke with a tight knot lodged in my chest. The memory of the koi pond and the cold smirk on my father's face played on repeat in my mind, like a cruel home movie I couldn't switch off. My laptop had been my lifeline, the vessel that carried not just my work but my reputation, my income, and my independence. Without it, I felt exposed, as though someone had yanked the floorboards out from beneath me. I pulled the dripping bag onto the bed and dragged the laptop out, its once sleek silver casing now water-stained and lifeless. Plugging it into a charger, I held my breath, praying for even the faintest hum, a flicker of light, any sign of survival. Nothing. Just silence. The screen stayed black, blank, and final. That laptop had carried my biggest client project to date, a campaign worth more than just the paycheck. If completed, it had the potential to bring in 10 times the cost of the machine itself. Every photo, every edit, every detail that I had poured myself into was gone, drowned by the deliberate act of my father. My hands trembled, not from grief but from a cold certainty. Richard hadn't dropped it by accident. He wanted it gone. I didn't waste another moment. Pulling out my phone, I opened my banking app. Years ago, when I was younger and perhaps a little more naive, I had agreed to open a joint account with my parents. The idea had been framed as a family safety net, a pool of funds for true emergencies. But the money inside it had always been mine. Hard-earned. Hours behind the lens, sleepless nights editing, invoices chased and delivered. They had dipped into it before, of course, each time with a flimsy excuse. Groceries. Bills. Something small they swore they would pay back. They never did. That morning, staring at the dead laptop on my bed, I decided there would be no more opportunities for them to reach into my pocket. With a few quick taps, I froze their access. My pulse steadied as if reclaiming control over even one part of my life was enough to plant my feet again on solid ground. My money would stay mine from now on. But I wasn't finished. Next, I logged into the shared cloud service I had used for years. My parents had piggybacked on it as well, saving files they couldn't be bothered to store properly on their own. For a long time I had tolerated it, telling myself it wasn't worth the fight. But now, after what they had done, the tolerance vanished. I revoked every one of their permissions, stripping them of access in seconds. My projects, my archives, my creative backbone. Locked tight behind digital walls they would never touch again. If Richard and Linda thought they could destroy my career while still feeding off the resources I paid for, they were about to face a harsh awakening. By noon, I thought I could finally breathe again. But my phone buzzed with a message that made my stomach twist. It was from Melissa Grant, my old colleague from the photography studio. The woman had always been sharp-eyed, a friend who could sniff out trouble before most people even noticed smoke. "Charlotte," she wrote, "your dad's emailing investors claiming you're his business partner." For a moment I stared at the screen, not quite believing what I was reading. My father had been leveraging my reputation, my name, to pitch his shaky business venture, the very one he had demanded $139,000 for. Melissa had seen one of the emails sent to a family friend, and she was quick to reach out. "He's telling people you're fully on board," she added. My stomach knotted tighter. Anger flared, but beneath it was disbelief, not because I thought my father incapable, but because the audacity was staggering. He hadn't just sabotaged my work. He had stolen my identity to build a lie. I called Melissa immediately, keeping my voice even though my chest was thudding. "He's lying," I said flatly. "I am not involved in anything he's doing. Can you get me those emails?" "Of course," Melissa said, her tone sharp with indignation. She had always had my back, and hearing her promise to gather the evidence sparked a small flame of relief. Her warning lit something fierce inside me. Richard wasn't just hurting me privately anymore. He was dragging my name into scams that could ruin me professionally. If word spread that I was connected to his venture, my credibility in the industry could unravel overnight. As if on cue, my phone buzzed again. This time it was the family group chat. Aunt Margaret Cole had typed, "Charlotte, you're being selfish. Your parents need support for their business. Families help each other." Before I could even process, Cousin Daniel Cole chimed in. "It was an accident, Charlotte. Why blow it out of proportion?" Their words landed like slaps. What stung wasn't just their dismissal, but their blindness. The way they so easily accepted Richard and Linda's narrative without asking for the truth. I could almost hear my father's smirk and my mother's false sympathy behind those words, weaving their version of events into the family's ear. I didn't bother replying. What good would it do? Instead, I closed the chat and opened my backup drive again. Relief washed over me when I realized I had saved copies of my client project elsewhere. The campaign wasn't gone entirely, but the damage meant hours, days even of re-editing from scratch. And the deadline loomed brutally close that if I missed it, my reputation could collapse. My clients would see me as unreliable, and in an industry where trust was everything, that would be catastrophic. I leaned back in the stiff hotel chair, staring up at the ceiling as my mind raced. Richard and Linda weren't just careless. They weren't just manipulative. They were actively trying to break me. And now, beyond the personal betrayal, they were using my name to trick investors. I opened a draft email to my client, fingers hovering over the keys. I wanted to explain the delay, but I stopped short of airing the family drama. Business was business, and I wasn't about to hand over my vulnerabilities. What I needed wasn't an emotional outburst. What I needed was evidence, hard, undeniable proof of what Richard was doing. Melissa's text was a start, but it wasn't enough. I needed more. I dug into the backup logs of my cloud service, checking for any unauthorized access. Nothing yet, but that didn't soothe me. If my parents thought they could keep leeching off my career while tearing it apart, they were gravely underestimating me. And as I sat there, my determination grew sharper. This wasn't going to end with me cleaning up their mess in silence. They had chosen to cross a line. Now I was going to show them what happened when you pushed me too far. 2 days later, I was ready to fight back. 2 days after the party, the sting of betrayal hadn't dulled. If anything, it had sharpened. Every time I replayed the moment of my father's smirk as my laptop sank into the koi pond, I felt that cold switch inside me flick again. This wasn't anger anymore, it was resolve. Richard Reed thought he could sabotage me, tarnish my name, and still move forward with his shady business venture. He thought he could reduce me to a helpless daughter begging for his approval, but he didn't know the version of Charlotte he was dealing with. That morning I called Melissa Grant. Her voice was brisk, almost like she had been waiting for me to reach out. "Charlotte," she said, "what your father is doing isn't just unethical, it's fraud. If he's using your name to lure investors, that's a crime." The word fraud rang in my ears. My own father, dipping into territory that could ruin not just me but anyone who put money into his scheme. I pressed my fingers against my temple, forcing myself to stay calm. "What do I need to prove it?" I asked. "Evidence," Melissa replied firmly. "Emails, texts, posts. Anything that shows he's lying about your role. You can sue, but you'll need hard proof." Her words were like fuel to the fire burning inside me. I opened my laptop and began digging through my inbox. Within minutes, Melissa forwarded me one of the emails she'd intercepted from Edward Barnes, a retired investor my parents had known for years. The email was jaw-dropping in its audacity. Richard had written that I was leading the creative vision for his venture, a blatant fabrication designed to lend credibility to his fragile idea. My jaw tightened as I read. I had never agreed to any involvement, yet here was my father using my career as his foundation. I dug deeper, sifting through threads I had ignored before. 2 more emails surfaced. Once my father had accidentally copied me on weeks earlier. In each he pitched to different investors, claiming I was fully committed to the project. The lies weren't subtle. They were bold, calculated, and crafted to exploit my hard-earned reputation. Next, I turned to the Phoenix Business Forum, a local hub where entrepreneurs networked and pitched ideas. My stomach churned as I scrolled through posts Richard had made. Each one tagged my name, boasting that Charlotte Reed was driving the project with her photography expertise. The posts had gained traction, likes, comments, even shares. People were discussing me as though I were the cornerstone of his operation. I wanted to scream, but instead I screenshot everything. Dozens of posts, each more outrageous than the last. I created a folder on my desktop labeled Evidence and started saving them one by one. The act felt grounding, as though each captured image was a brick in the wall I was building to protect myself. By mid-afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was Daniel Cole, my cousin, the same one who had dismissed me in the group chat. "Charlotte," his text read. "Are you really working with your dad on this?" His tone was different now, less certain, tinged with doubt. I saw an opening. I replied quickly, "No, Daniel. I'm not involved. I never was." Less than a minute later, my phone pinged again. This time it was a screenshot. A text from Richard dated 3 weeks earlier. "Charlotte's all in on this. It's a done deal." Then my pulse quickened. This was it. Direct proof of his deception, delivered straight from someone who had once sided against me. My cousin's hesitation had turned into my leverage. I called Melissa immediately, sharing the screenshot. "This is huge," she said, her voice steady but fierce. "Keep collecting. Don't confront him yet. The more you gather, the stronger your case." She was right. Every fiber of me wanted to call my father, to scream at him for the lies, the betrayal, the arrogance. But I held back. Confrontation without preparation would only give him room to twist the story, to paint me as the unstable daughter while he played the victim. No, I needed to be smarter than that. I spent hours combing through old messages, finding threads I had once ignored. A group chat from a month ago caught my eye. Richard had asked casually about my client list, claiming it was for networking. At the time, I brushed it off, too busy to question his motives. But now the pieces fit together. He hadn't wanted to connect people. He had wanted to target my contacts for his pitches. I saved those texts too, adding them to the growing dossier. The folder now contained 18 screenshots, 4 emails, and Daniel's damning message. It wasn't enough for a lawsuit yet, but it was a foundation. As night fell, I leaned back in my chair, staring at the glow of the evidence folder. My parents had underestimated me for years, dismissing my independence as arrogance, my boundaries as selfishness. They had mistaken my silence for weakness. But now, with every screenshot, with every file saved, I was proving them wrong. The next morning, I rose with a new sense of purpose. I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I was preparing for battle. I crafted a timeline, noting each incident. The laptop sabotage, the false claims to investors, the manipulation in the family chat. Piece by piece, the puzzle was forming a picture too damning to deny. I didn't feel fear anymore. I felt clarity. Richard and Linda Reed wanted to use me as the face of their scam, the tool to prop up their fragile egos and failing dreams. But I wasn't their pawn. I was their opponent now, and I was done playing nice. For the first time in days, I allowed myself a small smile. They thought they could destroy me with accidents and lies. They had no idea that I was building something stronger than revenge. I was building the truth. And soon the truth would be undeniable. 3 days later, I knew I was ready to escalate. Gathering screenshots, emails, and Daniel's reluctant confession had given me the foundation. But now I needed to turn evidence into action. This wasn't just about protecting my business anymore. It was about reclaiming my name and forcing Richard and Linda Reed to face the consequences of what they had done. That morning, Melissa connected me with her friend Rachel Hayes, a lawyer known in Phoenix for her sharp mind and no-nonsense style. We spoke over a video call, and I laid out everything: the sabotage of my laptop, the fraudulent claims to investors, the online posts that paraded me as part of their project. Rachel listened carefully, her expression composed but her eyes narrowing in concentration. When I finished, she leaned forward. "Charlotte, this is serious. You have more than enough to issue a cease and desist letter. It won't end the matter completely, but it will put them on notice and give you a legal record that you oppose their use of your name." The phrase cease and desist felt like armor being handed to me. Rachel drafted the letter quickly. Concise but firm, a clear line in the sand. Cease all use of Charlotte Reed's name in connection with your business ventures. Evidence of false claims is attached. We attached my growing dossier, 20 screenshots, 5 emails, and Daniel's damning text. And Rachel advised me to send copies not only to Richard and Linda but also to Edward Barnes, the investor they had been courting most aggressively. My pulse pounded as I hit send. It wasn't just an email. It was a declaration that I was no longer playing the quiet, obedient daughter. This was war.by mid-afternoon. My phone lit up with a new notification. Richard had wasted no time in responding, but not to me. Instead, he went back to the Phoenix Business Forum, posting publicly for anyone to see. "Charlotte Reed is trying to ruin my reputation with lies," he wrote. "She's a spiteful daughter sabotaging an honest project." The post had already gathered 15 likes and a string of comments. Some called me ungrateful. Others questioned my professionalism. My breath hitched, fury and disbelief colliding inside me. He wasn't just dodging accountability. He was weaponizing the narrative, turning me into the villain. I didn't reply. Instead, I captured every line of that post, saving it into my evidence folder. If Richard thought public slander would scare me into silence, he was about to learn otherwise. Minutes later, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Daniel. "Charlotte, you need to see this," his text read. Attached was a screenshot of a message Richard had sent the night of the family party. "Tossed her laptop in the pond. She'll think twice before defying us.my heart jolted. Not from surprise but from confirmation. The act I had witnessed, the smirk, the deliberate drop, was no accident. It had been sabotage from the start. Seeing it written in his own words crystallized everything. I replied quickly. "This is huge. Thank you." Daniel's response came almost instantly. "I should have believed you sooner." For the first time, I felt the ground shifting. The family that had rushed to defend Richard and Linda was no longer standing so firmly at their side. The cracks were widening. I checked the family group chat, half expecting a fresh wave of Aunt Margaret's criticism, but instead there was silence. No messages. No defenses. Just quiet. Perhaps Daniel had shared the screenshot with her. Or perhaps she had seen Richard's public rant on the forum and begun to doubt his version of events. Either way, her silence spoke volumes. That evening, I spent hours reorganizing my evidence. I added the slanderous forum post and Daniel's screenshot to the growing dossier, each new piece of proof sharpening the blade I was preparing to wield. Melissa called around 9 p.m. Her voice was calm but urgent. "Charlotte, that post he made could end up hurting him more than it hurts you. Document everything. Don't engage. Let him dig his own hole." Her words steadied me. I wanted to lash out online, to scream my truth into the void. But she was right. The evidence spoke louder than any argument I could post, so I focused instead on fortifying myself. I reviewed Rachel's cease and desist letter again, noting every detail. She had included a clear warning. If they didn't comply, legal action would follow. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of empowerment. I wasn't cornered anymore. I was drawing the map of the battlefield. Later that night, I checked my client contracts, combing through the fine print to ensure my projects were secure. My photography business was my lifeline, and I couldn't afford another accident. I transferred every file to a new encrypted cloud service and activated two-factor authentication. Each step was like reclaiming a piece of myself. When I finally closed my laptop, I sat in silence for a moment, letting the weight of it all settle. Richard's lies. Linda's complicit silence. The family's blind loyalty. And now, they're unraveling. They had underestimated me at every turn. But I was no longer the quiet daughter standing in the shadows of their expectations. I was standing on my own, armed with truth, evidence, and resolve. And I was only just beginning. The week after Rachel Hayes sent out the cease and desist letters, the consequences began to ripple outward like cracks spreading across glass. The first shockwave came from Edward Barnes. His email arrived mid-morning, short but powerful. "Charlotte, your evidence is clear. I am out of your father's venture, and I've advised others to do the same." Relief surged through me so sharply that I had to sit down. For days, the thought of Richard convincing investors with my name had kept me up at night. But here it was in writing. Edward had seen the truth, and he was walking away. By early afternoon, Melissa called with even more news. Her tone carried a buzz of excitement. 3 more investors bailed today," she said. "Your father's project is dead in the water." I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly as the tension in my shoulders finally began to ease. The Phoenix Business Forum, once a place where Richard had boasted about his connections to me, was turning into a graveyard of his credibility. The very posts where he had slandered me had been flagged and removed, Replaced with threads questioning his honesty, I scrolled through the forum myself, reading the shift in tone. Where once people had praised him, now they wondered aloud if he had lied. Some asked if I had really been involved. Others speculated about whether Richard had exaggerated his connections for years. It was as though his mask had slipped, and the community could finally see what was underneath. A quiet thrill ran through me. Not joy in his failure, but relief that the truth was finally seeping into the light. That evening, a text came from Daniel Cole. Aunt Margaret's done defending them. Nobody's on their side now that I read it twice, letting the words settle. Aunt Margaret, who had once scolded me for being selfish and dramatic, had gone silent. Whether it was Daniel's screenshot of Richard admitting to sabotaging my laptop or the collapse of the investor pool, she had finally stopped defending them. It wasn't that I needed her validation, but her retreat felt like a fracture in the once solid wall of family loyalty that had been used to box me in. Now that wall was crumbling. Not long after, word spread through a mutual acquaintance that Richard and Linda were spiraling financially. Without investor funds, their grand business venture had no lifeline. The joint account I had closed left them without a cushion, and their lavish lifestyle was catching up fast. They had been banking on me, on my money, my name, my reputation, to float their scheme. Now, stripped of all three, they were scrambling. That I didn't revel in their downfall, but I didn't pity them either. Every choice they had made had led them here. They had sabotaged me, stolen from me, lied about me, and expected me to clean up their mess. Their suffering was not my burden to carry. Meanwhile, my own career was climbing higher than ever. Weeks of careful recovery work had finally paid off. Despite the sabotage, I managed to salvage my client campaign. And in the process of rebuilding, I caught the attention of new opportunities. After a series of negotiations, I signed a $30,000 contract with the national magazine for their spring photography campaign. The deal was sealed over a video call. The editor raved about my unique vision, my eye for color and composition. As soon as I hung up, I transferred the $5,000 advance into my personal account and sat back with a genuine smile tugging at my lips. This was my victory. Not borrowed, not stolen, not propped up by anyone else. Mine. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my sketchbook, mapping out shoots across Arizona's deserts for the upcoming campaign. Warm tones of sandstone and stretches of endless sky filled my imagination. My parents had tried to drag me down, but I was rising higher than ever, and the contrast between us couldn't have been clearer. While I was planning shoots and cashing advance checks, Richard and Linda were pawning their belongings. A neighbor mentioned to Daniel that they had sold their car just to cover debts. Their once grand lifestyle, big dinners, designer clothes, trips they bragged about, was gone. Now they were tucked into a cramped rental, the walls closing in tighter each day. Aunt Margaret, once their loudest defender, hadn't contacted them in months. Daniel, though shaken, was no longer parroting their excuses. The family's silence spoke louder than any argument. I didn't waste time thinking about their plight. My focus was forward, on building, not on dwelling in my studio. Surrounded by framed prints from my latest shoots, I felt a surge of pride. My photography wasn't just my career, it was my shield, my proof that I could stand on my own unbroken. Every deposit into my bank account was a reminder. I didn't need Richard and Linda to survive. They had needed me, and without me their world had collapsed. For the first time in years I felt untouchable. Months passed, and with every day that slipped by, the distance between me and my parents grew wider. Richard and Linda Reed tried everything to claw their way back into my life. They sent texts, voicemails cloaked in guilt, and even a handwritten letter slipped under my studio door. The messages were all variations of the same script. Charlotte, we're family. Don't turn against us. Or worse, you're hurting your father. He just made mistakes, but he loves you. But I had learned by then that their words were nothing but tools, carefully crafted to manipulate me, to twist my sense of loyalty into a leash they could tug at whenever they pleased. I blocked their numbers, deleted their voicemails without listening, and tossed the letter into the trash unopened. Each act wasn't cruelty. It was survival. I wasn't bitter anymore. I was resolute. Their betrayal, using my name in fraudulent pitches, destroying my laptop, slandering me publicly, had left scars, but it had also built a fortress around my peace. And inside that fortress, I finally felt free. In my Phoenix studio, I looked around at the walls adorned with framed photos from my latest projects. Glowing desert horizons, towering red canyons, portraits of people whose faces carried stories in every line. My work surrounded me, reminding me of everything I had built. Not because of my parents, but in spite of them. One evening, I opened my journal, the leather cover worn soft under my fingertips. I wrote the words that had anchored me through the storm. Never let loyalty blind you to manipulation. Protect yourself first, always. Those words weren't just for me anymore. They were lessons carved from pain, ones I hope to carry forward, maybe even to share with others who faced the same suffocating weight of toxic family ties. News of my parents' downfall reached me in fragments. A neighbor mentioned they had sold their second car to cover debts. Their once grand lifestyle, cocktail parties, flashy vacations, endless spending, was reduced to the stark reality of a cramped rental apartment. The family who had once defended them so fiercely had gone silent. Even Aunt Margaret Cole, who had once accused me of selfishness, hadn't spoken to them in months. Their isolation was a mirror of their choices, but I didn't linger on their plight. I couldn't. Dwelling on their suffering would only tether me back to the cycle of guilt and responsibility I had already broken free from. Instead, I poured myself into the life I was building. The $30,000 magazine contract had opened doors I never could have imagined. Soon after, I was invited to host a gallery exhibition in Scottsdale, my photos of Arizona's deserts displayed against pristine white walls, visitors wandering with glasses of wine in hand, pausing to study the details of my work. From there, another opportunity arose: a tourism campaign for the state's canyon landscapes. It was a project that demanded weeks of travel, long hikes with gear slung across my shoulders, and countless early mornings chasing the perfect light. Exhausting? Absolutely. But it was the kind of exhaustion that filled me with purpose. I even hired an assistant, Sarah Nguyen, to help manage my packed schedule. She handled emails, coordinated with clients, and kept my shoots organized when I was out in the field. With her support, my days began to hum with a rhythm I had always dreamed of: creative, productive, thriving. Every deposit into my bank account was proof that my career was not only intact but soaring. My independence was no longer fragile, it was fortified. Sometimes in quiet moments, I would catch myself thinking about Richard and Linda, about how different things might have been if they had chosen to support me rather than exploit me, if they had celebrated my success instead of trying to siphon it for themselves, if they had been parents instead of saboteurs. But those thoughts never lasted long. I couldn't rewrite their choices. I could only own mine, and I had chosen to cut the leash. One afternoon, as sunlight spilled across my studio floor, I stood before a vibrant print of a desert horizon I had just finished editing. The colors glowed: burnt orange, dusky pink, a sliver of fading gold. Looking at it, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: pride unshadowed by guilt. This was my life, built on my terms, untouchable by their schemes. Richard and Linda were left with the wreckage of their actions, spiraling deeper into financial and social isolation. And me? I was thriving, unstoppable, a testament to my own strength. For years they had underestimated me, treating me as though I would always bend, always break, always come back no matter what they did. But now I had shown them that their control had limits, that my worth wasn't theirs to claim, that I wasn't just surviving their betrayal, I was flourishing because of it. And that, I realized, was the sweetest victory of all. Thank you for following this story till the end. If you found this an emotional journey of betrayal, justice, and inner strength, please help Revenge Amy reach its first 1,000 subscribers. Just a like and subscribe. Your support will be a great motivation for us to continue bringing more inspiring stories. Click subscribe today and be a part of this journey. See you in the next stories.